Barrel bombs, suicide attacks, chemical weapons. When will the horrific war in Syria come to an end? I'll ask a senior member of the Syrian opposition's High Negotiations Committee. I'm Mehdi Hassan, also on the show. What's the future for US-Mexico relations in an age of Trump? I'll ask the Mexican senator who's running for president and isn't afraid to attack Donald Trump. But first, more than 6 years on, thousands dead and millions driven from their homes, countless broken ceasefires and failed peace talks. Yet President Assad of Syria is still in office. So is the opposition to his regime fighting a losing war? This week's headliner, a senior member of the opposition High Negotiations Committee, Bassma Kodmani. Bassma Kodmani, thanks for joining me on UpFront. The Syrian conflict has been raging for more than 6 years. Syrians have been killed in their hundreds of thousands, and yet President Assad is still in power and on the offensive. He's not going anywhere anytime soon, is he? Or do you actually believe he can be toppled or removed from office still?
We never use the word toppled. We never say he should go through military means. That is not what the Syrian people want or the opposition wants. And I'm speaking here of the moderate opposition, the one that has put out a political solution, a vision for a political solution, who goes to Geneva to engage in peace talks and is willing to organize a transition and a controlled and negotiated departure for Assad. Assad is a war criminal. Everybody knows it. Even if he's not going to the International Court of Justice for the moment, he still is the criminal court, I'm sorry. Even then, he is still allowed by the Syrian people to benefit from a negotiated departure. And that is not calling for violence. So we're not talking about Assad ousted violently.
In April, when the US president launched airstrikes against a Syrian military airfield, the first US attack against the Syrian government, you wrote in favor of it, saying that President Trump's actions were a major first step to end the chaos and lay the foundation for a peace process. You said there's new pressure on Assad and his backers. It's been more than 4 weeks since those airstrikes. It doesn't look like much has changed on the ground in Syria. He's even using that same airfield to launch fighter jets. So Trump's attack changed nothing.
Look, the opposition still hopes that there will be a peaceful, negotiated, controlled transition in Syria. Otherwise, we will have a chaotic Syria and a chaotic region for the next decade or two. The strike that Donald Trump decided to conduct was a punitive strike for the use of weapons banned 100 years ago and banned by a convention, by an agreement signed by Russia and the US.
But you said it lays the foundation for a peace process. It hasn't done that at all.
That didn't happen. Well, we've tried diplomacy without any punitive action under the previous administration. That never made anything possible. We do hope that for once the Syrian people finally see that the regime can get some form of punitive action for using chemical weapons, for illegal behavior, and for crimes against humanity. Now, that is exactly what happened when Donald Trump decided to strike.
Do you really have faith in Donald Trump to resolve the conflict in Syria, to do what Obama couldn't? Donald Trump, a man who until a few weeks ago was pro-Assad and pro-Putin, a man who continues to block Syrian refugees from entering the United States.
Look, I think Donald Trump is learning what the Syrian conflict is all about. He thought that it was all about ISIS, and he is discovering that it's all about Assad, really, and that ISIS is a consequence of Assad, is a result of Assad. And he, I think, behaved in a principled way. For the first time, unfortunately, the previous administration, President Obama, used to speak principles, never implement anything. The Syrian people have been subjected to crimes, to war crimes and crimes against humanity.
It sounds like you
hospitals bombed, children killed and suffocating.
But let me ask you this. Will you, as a member of the Syrian opposition, condemn Donald Trump's ban on Syrian refugees? You say he's principled.
Why should I condemn or approve of a whole package? He is wrong in not admitting Syrian refugees. I wish he would do so, and that is what the opposition works to convince the administration to do. But on the other hand, when he conducts the kind of action that is required to get the regime to take seriously the option of a negotiation, because that is what Donald Trump said, and that is what his Secretary of State said in Moscow.
Many people would say taking Donald Trump at his word is a mistake.
And violated, well, we cannot judge on intentions. All we can judge on is acts. There was an action taken at the right time, the right kind of response that needed to take place and has needed to take place for the last 6 years. It happened. Now what comes next is what we hope Donald Trump is preparing in a serious way. We hope he links the fight against ISIS with the negotiated solution. That's what we need to see now.
According to human rights groups, in the month of March, the US-led coalition in Syria killed more Syrian civilians through airstrikes than ISIS and Russia. And yet you say you welcome US military intervention in Syria. You want more US airstrikes, even though it's killed more Syrian civilians than the Russian Air Force and than ISIS.
I do not wish to see one Syrian killed either by the coalition or by an American strike. And that is something that we all regret. We are put in a position where we have to approve of retaliatory action for the violation of humanitarian law and conventions.
With respect, that's not an answer to my question. My question was, how can you ask for more US military action when that is killing, in the month of March, more civilians than the Russian Air Force did, more civilians than ISIL did?
I'm not sure you heard me well. I did not ask for additional strikes in Syria. I am only saying that what we need is some action whenever Assad uses barrel bombs or chemical weapons. We need the protection of civilians in whatever shape or form. Has not happened.
Hold on. You're saying whatever shape or form.
The international community is responsible for protecting civilians.
Can we clarify this? Are you a supporter of the US-led coalition's airstrikes in Syria? Yes or no?
The US-led coalition is striking ISIS.
Are you a supporter of those strikes?
Striking the regime. But in both cases,
it's the same US-led coalition. It's the same US aircraft. We're in a situation
where we need air cover. I don't know what you are trying to get here.
I'm trying to understand why a member of the Syrian opposition is not bothered by the fact that more civilians were killed by the US-led coalition in March than by the Russians or ISIL. I'm not hearing you outraged about that or condemning the US for that.
I cannot condemn action against a terrorist organization. What I can regret is that we reach the point of a chaotic situation and a stronghold of ISIS.
That's
where
exactly
nobody can get
what the
ISIS
Russians
out
say
of
when
this
they kill
area
Syrian civilians.
Through military means.
They say we're targeting terrorists. That's exactly what the Russians say. They say we're killing terrorists. You're saying as long as the Americans are targeting terrorists, it doesn't matter if Syrian civilians die.
No, I am not saying civilians should die with terrorists.
But that's what's happening, Bassma. In March, the US killed more civilians than ISIL and Russia.
The civilians who are killed are not targeted. Unfortunately, the Russians are targeting hospitals. I don't know that the coalition is purposely deliberately targeting civilians and deliberately targeting hospitals, markets, and children. Now, there's a difference here. I regret every Syrian death, and I would like to see this end in a way where we use minimum force. Ground troops, Syrians would like to lead the battle against ISIS on the ground. Unfortunately, the strength that ISIS has acquired because of its presence in Iraq, because the regime Assad let it grow and allowed it to develop its presence in Syria, led us to a situation where we need military action.
Okay, but you would accept, would you not, that while the Assad regime may be responsible for the majority of civilian deaths in Syria and for the bulk of the war crimes in Syria, rebel groups have also killed civilians and have also been accused of committing vicious war crimes, haven't they?
Oh, yes, indeed. I think they should also be, these investigations should be led and they should be tried. But does this help us move forward? Is this just throwing the blame on groups and saying, oh, here's somebody else who committed a crime, so it's okay for it? The implicit
I don't think anyone's saying it. I don't think Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, when they document war crimes by rebels, I don't think they're saying it's okay for Assad to carry out war crimes. I think that's a bit of a smear to suggest that's what human rights groups are doing when they point out rebel war crimes.
I agree with you, and of course, but what you are the parallel you made between the two is perfectly legitimate. Everybody here should be tried, but nothing is happening, neither these nor the others. We are calling for the prosecution of all war crimes committed by anybody in Syria. We know there were killings by some extremist groups in Syria, and we want those prosecuted. We want sanctions against these people. We want punitive action also against them, but we want legal punitive action. So prosecution is what we want, because otherwise there will be no reconciliation in Syria, no back to normal, and that's where moderate opposition wants to link up with the rest of the people.
You have said in the past, and I quote, "We cannot get rid of Sunni jihadis, Daesh, al-Nusra, if we have this poisonous presence of Shia militias on the side of the regime." You have accused Iran of fueling jihadists on the opposition side. But are you seriously suggesting that if Iran and Hezbollah and the various so-called Shia militias pulled out of Syria, all of the foreign ISIL and al-Qaeda fighters would just forget about fighting Assad? They'd pack their bags and go home tomorrow morning? Really?
No, they will not pack their bags and go. We will need to fight them, unfortunately. And we know that our side will have to pay a very heavy price and heavy sacrifices to fight the jihadis. But it's not a war that we can lead unless we have those sectarian militias, Iran-led militias on the other side, pull away from those front lines. The day that happens, believe me, the fight against the extremist jihadis will start. And that fight is going to be hard, but the population is determined to get rid of these groups. They are the poison in our ranks, and they are fueled by the poison on the other side.
But
I reiterate and I confirm
they may be poison in your ranks,
continues to happen.
But they also dominate your ranks. They dominate the military side of your side. The strongest rebel fighting groups are either the jihadists, quote unquote, or they're Salafist fighting groups. They're the Ahrar al-Shams, the Jund al-Aqsas, and the rest. There are a lot of quote unquote Salafists, Islamists of various varieties dominating the rebel fighting group. The secular rebels aren't the dominant fighting group, are they? That's the reality.
The secular rebels will lead the just fight when it is possible. They're sitting, waiting for that to become possible. And they can raise tens of thousands of fighters to lead a just war against these groups. Believe me, we are only waiting for the moment when there will be a solid ceasefire, a credible ceasefire enforced with mechanisms of enforcement that are in place. At that moment, the dynamics on the ground will change. But we need those Shia militias away from those front lines to start that fight. This is about to happen the day a ceasefire is signed. And everybody knows that. Russia knows it. The United States knows it. But we still don't have the conditions to start that.
Bassma Kodmani, thanks for joining me on UpFront. Across Europe and the US, the rise of populism has been fueled by anti-immigrant sentiment, with foreigners being blamed for taking jobs and committing crimes. How much of that is true, though? UpFront producer Kieran Alvey has this week's reality check.
We hear about immigration endlessly, people debating why it's good, why it's bad. But what's really the case? Are immigrants criminals, stealing jobs and sponging welfare benefits? Well, let's just look at the research. First, immigrants don't commit more crime than natives. Take Germany. Even with its mass influx of migrants in 2015, its own Federal Office of Criminal Investigation said migrants had not increased the crime rate. And police noted that the typical native German was actually more likely to engage in crime. And it's the same in the country with the largest number of immigrants in the world, the US. The American Immigration Council says innumerable studies have confirmed immigrants are less likely to commit serious crimes or be behind bars than the native born. Second, when it comes to jobs and wages for natives, the vast majority of research shows that immigrants actually have a positive effect. And take this one significant study that saw immigrants in the U.S. can lower the wages for high school dropouts and college graduates. Well, after averaging all wage changes, it actually saw a tiny overall wage increase. And the author of that report even wrote in 2016, the influx of immigrants can potentially increase the total wealth of the population. And do natives even want the jobs that many immigrants have? One U.S. experiment took 6,500 farm jobs that Mexican migrants usually did and offered them exclusively to unemployed Americans. But only 268 people applied, more than half quit a month later, and less than 3% of Americans actually finished the job, while 90% of Mexicans did. And finally, the argument that immigrants unfairly take benefits, well, the OECD found that in most countries, except in those with a large share of older migrants, they contribute more in taxes and social contributions than they receive in individual benefits. And immigrants are also more than twice as likely as natives to start a business, bringing substantial benefits to advanced economies. Think about it. Google, AT&T, Yahoo, SpaceX, WhatsApp, etc., were all founded by immigrants. Now, if you want to debate integration and cultural differences, fine. But if we're talking about crime and economy, well, the research has spoken. And overall, immigration is a good thing.
He says he's come to the United States to stand up to Trump's threats against his fellow Mexicans. Presidential candidate and Senator Armando Rios Piter has been a vocal critic of the new administration in Washington and is campaigning for his government to help Mexican immigrants in the United States. He's also quit his party, the PRD, to launch his independent bid for the Mexican presidency in next year's election. He joins me now. Thanks for coming on Upfront. Armando Rios Piter, you want to be the next president of Mexico. What would Mexico-US relations look like under a Rios Piter presidency, given you've called President Trump bipolar and schizophrenic?
Well, I hope it is a reinvigorated relationship. We've had a good relationship for 20 years, more than 20 years, regarding NAFTA, regarding how to solve problems together. Now that we have a new president in the United States, I think we need to retake this. And the way to do it on the side of Mexico is putting very clear what we bring to the table, how important Mexico is to the U.S. relationship. I think there's more information right now that President Trump has on his table, and I think he's knowing right now more about the strategic importance regarding security, trade, migration of Mexico.
But as president of Mexico, you won't hesitate to call him mentally ill.
Well, of course, I wouldn't be able to do that as a president, but I wouldn't say that I thought that being a candidate and probably when he was already in office and being a senator, that's the way he has been behaving. He has been behaving with a lot of errors and with a lot of volatility regarding his decisions.
You've said in the past that President Peña Nieto of Mexico made a big mistake by not making it clear from the beginning to Donald Trump that Mexico would not pay for the wall at the border. But how far would you have gone if you were in Peña Nieto's place? Would you have threatened to cut ties with the United States, your neighbor, your biggest trading partner?
No, of course not. I mean, it has to do on the way you see things and the way you put the things on the table, not only regarding U.S. administration, but also to the entire world. I mean, the wall is a hostile act. It's an unfriendly act. That's the way you should start talking about it if you're a Mexican, and specifically if you're the Mexican president. That's the way you should be saying, talking about this issue in the OAS, in the ONU, in the UN. But I think that's the position. It's a more dignifying way about seeing one specific thing as the wall. If they want to build it, well,
okay. But in terms of getting things done, Peña Nieto's strategy of hugging Trump close seems to be paying off. Just the other week, Trump went back on his promise that he would tear up NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, partly because, he said, of a phone call from President Peña Nieto, who he said he likes.
Well, I don't believe that. I mean, that's the new way of doing politics on the side of Donald Trump, saying everything in a loudy way. That's the way I see the new American president. I think that he decided not to withdraw from NAFTA because it's not an intelligent idea, because he has known right now how important NAFTA is for American producers and for American consumers.
Okay, so NAFTA is important because of trade, free trade.
Sure, because
in response to Trump's rhetoric and threats, you put forward a bill in the Mexican Senate to halt purchases of corn from the US. Are you really willing to start a trade war with the US? If you start doing economic measures trying to harm the US economy, you'll look like the bad guys, not the US government.
The basic point of my bill has to do with telling specifically some states of the Midwest, like Iowa, Nebraska, Wisconsin, how important Mexico is for them. Because all this rhetoric on the side of Donald Trump has been saying Mexico takes advantage of the US. Mexico is useless regarding common trade. Well, let's put on the table what Mexico means regarding corn consumption and regarding 1.5 million tons that we've been buying for the last two decades to these states, and telling them...
But you've proposed eliminating all imports of corn from the US in 3 years, and you think the Trump administration wouldn't respond harshly to that kind of economic
Of course they would.
So you are starting a trade war with the US.
The way they started it is saying we are going to withdraw from NAFTA. I mean, that's the point.
He's taking that away now, so you're going to take your bill off the table?
My bill was before, and the issue is...
So is your bill gone now? You've withdrawn it?
I would say, let's see how this evolves. I mean, I'm only seeing what the public actions of Donald Trump are in the media. I don't know how these guys are, if they are really talking seriously, because sometimes you see people from the administration saying something, and then the president changes.
But to cut to the heart of it, you think Mexico has leverage to stand up to Trump?
I think it's important to leverage and keep on leveraging enough to say we can continue to be partners. And corn, of course, is a very important issue.
You are now running for president in 2018, but you've been senator of the state of Guerrero since 2012, which is one of the most violent states in Mexico. Journalists are being killed there on a regular basis. It's now called the heroin capital of your country. One of your former colleagues called it a failed state. Wouldn't it make sense for you to try and fix your own state first, rather than standing for president to try and fix the whole country?
Well, I've been trying to fix my home state. I was running for being a governor two years ago, but something that internationally was pretty well known as the part of the terrifying history of Mexico right now, that was the kidnapping of the 43 people from Ayotzinapa, the kids from Ayotzinapa. And the thing is that I was the first runner for being governor, for being candidate and then governor. I would have gone if I had run for governor. I decided not to do it because of the corruption, that's why I said, and because of the impunity that is right now part of Mexican politics.
And you quit your PRD party.
And I quit after that to the PRD party. And why this is important? Because you cannot fix Mexico if you don't fix broader things regarding Mexico as a country. And that's why being president is so important.
When you're running for president, people will point to your own state and your record in that state and say, why would we vote for this guy when he's from the worst, one of those violent parts of the country?
I think that's one of my stronger points. It's like, if you want to fix the part of Mexico regarding violence, specifically Guerrero, then you must make a huge shift regarding policy of drugs, and especially regarding fighting impunity. It has to do with procurement, with the Department of Justice, and this is not solved only in Guerrero. This must be solved as a country.
You say the system is corrupt, that the parties are part of that corruption. But you've been part of the Mexican political system for a decade or more. Yeah. It's not as if you're some kind of outsider. You're not a Trump figure coming from the world of business. You're part of the system. Yeah. So does that make you as corrupt as anyone else?
No, of course not. I'm a very clean politician. And that's the way that you are able to stand up and say, this is the kind of corruption that is affecting Mexico. This is the kind of corruption that is generating crime. This is the kind of corruption that is getting so much killings. And this is not only a problem of Guerrero. It's a problem of the whole country. That's the way you must stand up against the system.
You've described yourself as a champion of the people, concerned with the plight of the Mexican poor. Your signature policy is to raise the minimum wage. But as a senator, you also voted for a controversial law that raised gas prices this year by 20%, which then led to thousands of your fellow Mexicans taking to the streets in protest. I think 4 people died.
Well, the very big problem of Mexico right now regarding economy is its finances. Mexico is not earning many taxes, and we have a huge problem regarding taxes. So that's the main point about that gas increasing. So that's the way you should be.
It's the poor. There's many other ways of getting taxes from the rich.
It's not only about the poor. It's about all the economy.
Why did so many people take to the streets? Are they all mad?
Well, because they're pretty mad against Peña Nieto. Peña Nieto said
you voted for the bill then?
Yes, of course, I did.
Why did you vote?
Peña Nieto, of course, because it made sense. The problem is that Peña Nieto lied about doing this. I mean,
the problem was the U-turn, that he said he wouldn't do it and did it. That's the problem.
He said that, so that's why.
Not the rise. You don't think it's actually the rise that's bothered people?
The rise got people mad, but I think, in my opinion, right now, people is so mad against Peña Nieto because he has lied not only in this thing, in a lot of things, and they see him as a corrupt guy.
We'll have to leave it there. Armando Rios Piter, thank you for joining me on UpFront. That's our show. UpFront will be back next week.